In August of 2015, a very strange incident would occur in Gua Masang, a town in Malaysia. 7 Orang Asli young people would vanish from this place, and the whole series of events can only be described as bizarre. The term Orang Asli is used to refer to the indigenous people of Malaysia and translates to the original people or the first people. The Lobak Merah, a press outlet in Malaysia, reported that on the 23rd of August 2015, Noreen Yaakob, her sibling Haikal Yaakob, Mersudia Aluj, Aika Ayul, Sasa Sobri, Linda Rossley and Javina David, all aged between 11 and 6, vanished from their boarding school. According to the press outlet, they had gone swimming in a nearby river without permission and were caught doing so by a member of staff, which made them believe that they were going to get into trouble, and as a result, they did not return that day. Instead of returning, they entered into the jungle to avoid whatever discipline they thought they were going to face. It seems to me that if the disciplinary policies are going to cause a bunch of young people to prefer the idea of running away into the wilderness, it might be time to reevaluate. The youth chairman, Dendi Johari, said that they saw the teacher and they continued to flee into the forest for fear of being disciplined, but are believed to have strayed until they failed to return. Nor did they return any time during the week. On the 30th of August, which was now exactly 7 days after they first fled into the jungle, Noreen and Haikal's mother stated that she'd had an unsettling dream. On Thursday, I woke up suddenly at 3 AM and I was sweating. I had an omen that something bad would happen to them. I do not think they can survive in the jungle. I last saw Noreen and Haikal 2 months ago during the holidays. Both love to be pampered. I cannot believe that they ran away, unless they were very scared. The local fire departments, alongside professional search and rescue teams, had been out all day, every day, searching every nook and cranny according to a senior officer in the fire department. Leaders of the effort had various search dog teams out in the jungle, but at no point did they find anyone scent, which seems to have put a real dent in the search effort, as they believed that the dogs were going to be the force that found them. At this point, something weird happened, so let's get bizarre. An Orang Asli tracker, Anga Chaki, said that there was a belief that the 7 had been hidden by the Orang Bunyan. No footprints have been found so far, he said. I have never seen anything like this before, he said, citing how they'd yet to detect any telltale signs of where they'd gone. Anga and many others alongside him felt that there was something unnatural about this disappearance and that something completely out of the ordinary had happened to the 7. In Malaysia, the Orang Bunyan are known as the hidden people. Let's get an understanding of what was being referred to. The Orang Bunyan are said to be a people that are invisible to most humans, except those with special sight. While the term is often translated as elves, it literally translates to hidden people or whistling people. The Orang Bunyan are said to inhabit the deep forests or high mountains far from human contact, but in some cases close to human communities, and are even said to share the same houses as human families. They must be appeased with certain customs before people are allowed to trespass areas in which they inhabit. One tale speaks of a man who was taken by the Orang Bunyan, and at some point they allowed him back into human society. But he found that many years had passed and everyone he once knew was no longer here. The native people take this idea very seriously, and this was a genuine explanation that was being contemplated because of the lack of any scent trail, footprints or any indication in general of where they might have gone, despite having had hundreds of people in the jungle searching for them the entire time, including the military who also got involved. What absolutely fascinates me about this kind of subject is that you can find reference to a kind of hidden people all over the world. In Europe, many years ago now, the fairy faith was prominent, and while this belief set is still around today, it's a lot smaller, but the fae were believed to have been able to hide in plain sight and existed all around us. It does make me wonder if somehow different cultures around the world were all referring to the same thing but gave it a different name. The Native Americans called them the little people, The Spanish called them duende, Europeans, as said, the fae, and other parts of the world, the jinn, and other such terms that seem to describe a peoples that are somehow around us but cannot be seen. I have a video on this subject which I'll link to in the description below if you're interested about such things. Anyway, moving back to the missing 7, something so absurd happened that it might just be the most absurd thing I think I've ever heard. According to The Star, another press outlet, the families of the 7 received a letter from the boarding school. This letter, pictured, stated that if those that were missing did not return to their school within 31 days, they would be expelled. A spokesperson from their place of education allegedly claimed that the parents had failed to provide an adequate explanation for their absences since August 23rd, the same day that they were missing. The Deputy Education Minister said that he had checked with the Ministry of Education and he couldn't find the alleged expulsion letters, and that they might be fake and sent by someone not involved in anything. I suppose that he was either trying to sweep that one right under the rug, or some stranger could have been playing a cruel joke, or something similar. And good actual lord, I hope it wasn't a real letter from the boarding school. I have a hard time believing that anyone could be that out of touch. It's beyond common sense, and is basically clinical stupidity if that really happened. I was annoyed in reading that, so I can only imagine the absolute outrage of the parents upon receiving them. A former member of the Sonoy Prague, a traditional warrior force of the native people and used to be within the military, shared his incredulity. He said that it made no sense that the 7 could disappear so thoroughly in this manner in so short a time. He noted that their homes were between 15 and 30 miles from the boarding school and they knew how to get back. He said, "I say this because there is only one route to go in and out, and I travelled this route when following the security forces. At that time, we wanted to send extra food supplies to military members that has been in the jungle for over a week. Looking at the situation, it is impossible for the 7 to disappear in the jungle due to the structure of the terrain here, which would prevent them from moving very far. I tried to put myself in the situation of the 7 as they tried to get back home. Admittedly, at such a young age, the first thing that comes to mind is wanting to get home quickly for fear of being alone in the woods without supervision. I and the 2nd rescue team were asked to enter the forest area, but we did not find any signs of them. There were no footprints on the route when we got there, 2 days after they were reported missing. At that time, it was unthinkable that people as young as them could venture into the jungle area because the slope is very steep. We ourselves found it difficult to go down, so it is impossible for them to have gone down there. Before this, there has never been any missing people here. The road is already there, and there is no need to enter the forest unless you want to find food. It is very strange how they could just disappear. This is an interesting take, because the Sonoy Prague and the natives in general have a great understanding of their wilderness areas. Other Orang Asli trackers shared this sentiment, stating that it was very bizarre, essentially that absolutely no tracks had been discovered and that all of the search dogs that had been present had never found a scent at any point. It seems that a number of people may have come to believe that the 7 weren't even in the jungle anymore and perhaps had never been. In other words, there may have been a belief that the 7 were taken by someone, or that, as mentioned earlier, that something incredibly out of the ordinary had happened to them by way of this belief in the Orang Bunyan. By the 21st of September, the 7 had still not been found, and now they had been missing for almost an entire month. Search leaders, among others, pointed out that the chances of finding them in any kind of good condition were now very slim because they didn't have any supplies with them. The military and professional search and rescuers, hundreds of them, had searched a radius greater than 50 miles from the point at which they vanished inside the jungle, with absolutely no clues whatsoever. The locals found this disappearance so bizarre that they invited 40 shamans to assist in bringing the 7 back, because this suspicion that they'd been taken by the Orang Bunyan was so strong. The Orang Asli people seemed to think that they must have entered an area that they shouldn't have and were then taken. Given the colossal search effort that had been taking place for the entire duration and producing no results, it seems reasonable to start wondering if a third party could have been involved. While there was all of this talk surrounding the so-called Orang Bunyan, I am sure there must have been those that questioned whether another person might have been responsible. There were no further updates until the 7th of October, a massive 45 days from the initial disappearance, and it was not a good update. A body in a state of advanced decomposition was found just 500 metres away from the point of the initial place that they were last seen. The police chief said that the body was found stuck against a wooden tree trunk by the river and was found by local villagers. So, after all that time and all those hours put in by hundreds upon hundreds of professional searchers, Orang Asli trekkers, volunteers and the military, we learned that one of them, who was thought to be Sasa at first but turned out to be Linda, was just 500 metres away from where she started. It's difficult to imagine that she was in that exact spot the entire time. It's highly unlikely that an area that close to the initial disappearance was not thoroughly searched many times over, given the resources that were put into it. A 50-mile radius had been searched, so it's very difficult to accept that an area so nearby had been overlooked. It could have been that Linda had fallen into the river at another location and had then been swept downstream. The Department of Chemistry said that it appeared as though Linda had passed away between 1 and 2 weeks before being found. So in other words, she had made it as far as 31 to 38 days in, which is a surprisingly long time to have been there without seeing any of the searchers. The day afterwards, on the 8th, more remains were found. This was Ica, and evidence on the scene seemed to indicate that a fall had taken place. The day beyond this, on the 9th, was also significant. Noreen and Mersudia were both found alive not far from the location of the remains. They had survived for 47 days and were found in a state of emaciation and appeared as though they'd been drinking river water and eating forest plants. They were so tired that they were unable to walk. On the 10th, Noreen said something very odd. She said that Jovina was the first to pass away, followed by Haikal, Sasa, Ica and then Linda. Then she said that they were being fed by someone, which was the reason they survived. She recalled that Haikal had been swept away by the river, but was not sure what happened to Linda and Sasa. It's not clear if this was the same night or separate nights, but Noreen said that overnight they had each slept on a boulder, but upon awakening they were no longer there. She didn't hear anything overnight, no splashes, shouts or calls for help. She said that they had just vanished by the time that she was awake. Dr. Ahmad Razin was tasked with checking them over, and he said that they appeared very quiet and did not want to talk, and that they withdrew from the examination. So clearly there was an obvious level of psychological damage there, and I very much hope that they received a lot of support in the aftermath of this incident. Noreen was asked why they ran away in the first place, but apparently she wouldn't explain it to her mother. It's difficult to start speculating on that point without any evidence, as there are a lot of potential implications that I can't get into without more facts being known. Mazlan Lazim, a police chief in Kellington, said that there was no evidence of any criminal activity in this case. He said that they walked in a group, all 7 of them, without anyone else guiding them. When asked why they did not walk home, the survivors said that they were worried that they might get lost. I'm not entirely sure what this means, because it appears to me and reads as though they were already lost. As for the boarding school, in the immediate aftermath of this incident, attendance dropped from 130 people down to just 20. I personally feel that it should have been closed entirely until a thorough investigation had taken place. The press were now probing, and they opened a can of worms, so to speak. They found that there were claims of mistreatment and poor conditions, such as having to sleep on cement floors and having to wear uniforms that had not been cleaned. One pupil said that on some days they would learn for a total of 2 hours and would then be left to their own devices for the rest of the time. This next part is absolutely outrageous, but it also came to light that the boarding school did not notify the families as to what happened, but instead filed a missing persons report 2 days after the initial disappearance. I won't linger on that, other than reiterating that in the aftermath, I hope that a full-scale investigation took place. Now, back to Noreen and Mersudia. I hadn't mentioned this yet, but at the point in which they were found, it was around 2 miles from the boarding school and about 1.2 miles from a main logging road. We also have to get bizarre again, because something else was said. Mirsudia said that she heard the sound of helicopters and started calling to the rescue workers who were looking in the nearby area. However, the screams were not heard by the rescue team, despite the short distance. According to Mirsudia's uncle, Akek Bahir, the sound of the helicopter could be heard over their heads. Even when the search teams conducted a search in the area, Mirsudia realised the presence of its members. However, her and others' screams were not heard even though the sound of the rescue team was quite close to them. I believe the fate of the other 5 would have been different if they had heard them. He then said this: "We believe the rescue team failed to hear the screams because they were being held by the Orang Asli. I myself searched the area they were found 4 days after they disappeared. In fact, there were nights when I spent the night in the forest, but still no trace was found. This incident is really confusing." Akek said that Mirsudia is still in a state of confusion and does not remember the incident well. Mirsudia's uncle, essentially, was saying that the area that they were both found had been searched previously, by himself and the team that he was a part of, but they were not there. The circumstances of this whole incident are very odd. These 2 young people had no survival skills and managed to survive for 48 days. They seem to have recognised that searchers were nearby at some point and they tried to get their attention by shouting, but for some reason the searchers could not hear them. Noreen spoke about how 2 members of the 7 disappeared without a trace, and then also that someone else was present and feeding them. Law enforcement stated that there was no evidence of foul play, so it doesn't appear that the police thought that anyone else was involved in taking them. There's some conflicting information too. Mirsudia's uncle said that he, among others, had searched the area where they were eventually found. But in this article by Sayers, it states this: "The 7 could have been found much sooner if the search and rescue teams had expanded their search to the upstream of Sungai Pereus, which was thought to be too difficult for the 7 to cross through." The COAC claimed that when the locals decided to check out the upstream of Sungai Pereus after the search yielded no results, they were not allowed to do so as there were orders that only official search and rescue teams could enter the area. I'm not sure what to make of that. It's certainly possible that if the official search effort was not prepared to go to the area at that time, then family and locals might have just gone there anyway to look. Noreen and Mirsudia themselves also said that they'd heard helicopters and searchers nearby, so searchers must have been around that location, or at least around whatever location they were at that time. Now at this point, the police gave some more information and context as to what took place. The series of incidents actually began on the 22nd of August, the day before they went missing. A group of 23 students had talked about leaving and going back to their homes in the villages of Kampung Panad and Kampung Gawin. The day afterwards, the 23rd, is when the 7 who went missing entered the river to swim at 1 PM with a group of 25 people. This is when they were spotted by a member of staff who called out to 3 of them and said that there would be some kind of discipline before leaving the school grounds. The staff then met with 16 of these students at 6 PM and persuaded them to return to their dorms. However, the 7 had already gone. The reason they gave for not reporting the 7 as missing was because this wasn't the first time that students had left and returned sometime later, or were then located at their actual homes. In addition, it seems that the staff, on the 25th, also went to their respective homes to see if they were there. Apparently, at some point, law enforcement were privately investigating whether or not they could have been taken by a third party, but later concluded that there was just no evidence to point in that direction. The suspicion of a third party being present or responsible is a strange one in this case, because as said, there was no evidence. But Noreen had said that someone had been leaving them food. One of the 2, though I'm not sure which, said that during their time spent missing, they'd been to a beautiful village full of food and fruits, which also had very clear river water. That is also very odd, and I'm absolutely certain will have had many of the locals pointing to the idea and solidifying their beliefs that the Orang Asli had taken them. I do wonder though if there may be a psychological explanation that could help to explain what might have happened in regards to that. We do know that, specifically, when a young person experiences a high level of distress, it can cause the onset of imaginary companions, or imaginary friends. While I'm sure that this can happen to adults too, young people seem to be more prone to experiencing this as a result of such situations. Now, the idea of imaginary friends has been interpreted in a number of ways by different people. Some people believe that these types of things are a kind of spiritual experience, and there are all kinds of opinions that lean in that direction. In fact, I remember one such incident where a woman, Hayley Zager, now 29, went missing in the Ozark Mountains when she was just 6, and she later explained that an imaginary friend or something similar appeared almost immediately after becoming lost, and quite literally helped lead her to safety and kept her calm. I don't know how she feels about it today, but I do believe that there was a point where she did lean towards the idea of it being spiritual or something along those lines. The psychological view are that these are manifestations of the mind. We're social creatures after all. We know that sharing issues can help us to cope with problems and terrible situations in life. It could be that this happens to young people so they don't feel like they're going through these awful things alone, and just preventing that feeling of being alone in general. Without going too in depth, the idea is that these types of incidents that cause a high amount of stress can cause dissociative identity disorders to develop in response. We know that young people who have these disorders present imaginary friends much more frequently than those who have not been through some kind of terrible experience. It's worth mentioning that young people can experience having imaginary friends without going through something bad, but it's just less frequent. Imaginary friends aren't always people either. Sometimes they're animals, for example. There are likely to be a whole host of reasons as to why this develops in the first place, but it seems to me that loneliness plays an important role. I bring this up because I've seen people speculating that this someone else could have been imaginary, and there is certainly a strong case for that. In my notes from years ago, when I first came across this case, there was one source that indicated that both Noreen and Mirsudia may have mentioned this supposed someone else. The link no longer works, and there's nothing I can find in the Wayback Machine. It's very frustrating, and actually happens a lot that articles from even a few years ago just vanish and they're gone forever. If it really was the case that they both actually did describe seeing this someone else and being fed by them from time to time, then that is something very strange. I've never heard of a joint imaginary friend before, and I'm not even sure if something like that is even possible, as it's not something I've ever seen mentioned in psychology literature. There is one mechanism that could potentially explain it, and this idea actually came up in my previous video too, the idea of folie à deux, or as I prefer, shared madness, and as it used to be known in the DSM-5, shared psychotic disorder. This is a very rare psychological state in which two or more people share the same delusion or hallucination. Though, to be honest, if it truly was the case that they both genuinely reported this someone else, I don't know how to explain that one very well. It's just difficult to imagine a situation in which another person was present here. No one had been assaulted or anything like that within the jungle, and there was no evidence of such harm. So this someone else, we're saying, would just swing by randomly from time to time and hand them food? That is a very weird thing, and it's difficult to imagine that being the case. If another person truly was there, why didn't they intervene or anything else? Perhaps this was some kind of shared madness in their moments of shared distress. Perhaps some kind of delirious state had been induced in the pair that was causing that. It could have been some kind of hallucination, though I'm sure that the locals would have a completely different interpretation of that with the things that were being said surrounding the Orang Bunyan. Again though, that is if the pair really did report seeing this someone else and not just Noreen. One thing that cannot be denied though is that these two very young people made it for 48 days with only minimal amounts of food. Apparently, a well-nourished man weighing around 150 pounds typically will have enough calories stored to last around 2 months without food. I'm not sure how that translates to young people. Presumably they would have less time than an adult as they have a much lower body mass. 48 days is just a very long time to have been out there with no survival skills at all. And I suppose that in some ways just makes this incident just that much more astonishing. I haven't come across an incident quite like this one before. That about brings us to the end of this. As a final update, I did read that the families of the 7 sued and won in court. I believe that Noreen and Mersudia, since that ordeal, have been trying to live normal lives with their respective families and communities. But they do still struggle with what happened those years ago. I can only hope that they're in a better place now than they were and still have all the support that they need. I'd just like to take the time and thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you found this video interesting, please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you didn't like it, then feel free to give me a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys. Peace.